because this book talked about these fabulous African American women in the early 40s who lived in the segregated South and also were segregated because of their profession, who wanted to make a difference in their careers. And that's why these women are hidden. That they were among, even their own children, their neighbors, really didn't know their story, didn't know how much they had contributed to our space program. And maybe it was funny, but last night Apollo 13 was on. You know, Tom Hanks does get back. I'm sure 13 hasn't seen it. But they showed the whole room there in Houston, and this was supposed to be filmed in 1970. And you looked at that room. Now, whether it was completely authentic or not, I don't know. But there was not a woman, not an African American, nobody in that room, at least in the film in 1970, bringing old Tom Hanks back from space. But when you saw and read the story of these women, they were the ones who got Tom up into space. People among us who have these stories. People among us right now, probably in this room, who have these stories that we really never explore. I mean, that's when this woman wrote that book. She was like, she was the first African American who did what? So here you are.
So I wrote down some notes. It's such an honor to be here, and I'm going to kind of wing it a little bit and kind of glance over occasionally to keep myself focused, and then you do this because lecturers and faculty do have a tendency to be pro-length, and I'm one of them. So who am I? My name is K.Cook-Chennault. I'm a faculty member at Rutgers, and as mentioned before, my PhD was in engineering and from the University of Michigan, but I was the first to get, I guess, a PhD, and I think the first in engineering. But I said non-traditional, so what's non-traditional? I guess that's non-traditional. After getting my undergrad, I went to Stanford, and then I left because I wanted to work. I worked for a national laboratory. Does anybody know what the national laboratories do? This is kind of cool. So, all over the country, our government has different laboratories that are focused on strategic initiatives that are important to our nation. For example, the one I worked for, Lawrence Livermore Lab, was through the Department of Energy. I was a support person, right? Meaning, I worked in a laboratory with a bunch of physicists and scientists who were working on explosives. I had one of those security clearances where they ask you all these questions about who you are to make sure you're not, crazy, and they don't want you to find out how to make bombs and explosives. So, background check. But what did I do as an engineer? Because I wasn't a physicist. I wasn't the person that was actually designing the bombs and explosives. I had to know about them. I had to know how they were designed and a bunch of other stuff that I can't talk about. But what I had to know how to do was I had to design storage containers to transport and to keep people that were in the vicinity miles and miles out safe from if there was an issue with these explosives. So as a fairly young engineer, I got to do stuff that I used to think wasn't so important, but now that I'm really old, I realize, gosh, some of that stuff is kind of really important. And designing containers for explosives. And then from there, I worked in the automotive industry. And I guess I was supposed to, at some point here, explain why in the heck I wanted to be an engineer. And the honest to God's truth is I had no idea what engineers do whatsoever.
Hi, how are you? Greetings, sister. How are you?
Oh, hi, good afternoon.
Would you introduce yourself, please, to the people?
Okay, my name's Kimberly Cook-Chennault, and
Or doctor?
Dr. Kimberly Cook-Chennault, and I'm a professor at Rutgers University in mechanical and aerospace engineering.
Mechanical and aerospace engineering. You're in charge of the planes and the trains and the automobiles. So, you see, ladies and gentlemen, if you study hard, you be in charge too.
I'm from Detroit, Michigan, from the real Detroit. I'm not from the suburbs of Detroit. I need to make that clear.
Detroit. Right.
Detroit, yes. I went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor for undergrad in mechanical engineering. Then I went to Stanford in mechanical engineering, and I originally started out as an undergrad at Michigan, being a music and an engineering major, and eventually left the School of Music to dedicate full-time to only engineering. And when I went to Stanford initially, I started out in wanting to do the PhD, but then I finished the master's and I left and I worked for 5 years at a national laboratory, and also worked at Ford Motor Company. Some of my internships, the fun ones, I guess, would be I worked for General Mills, working on making Cheerio and cereals better. I worked for Cummins Engine, which is a diesel engine company. Let's see, Ford, Visteon, any other cool things? I think the National Lab was really cool. And then I decided I wanted to go back and get my PhD, and I went back to the University of Michigan, biomechanical engineering, and went on to, I taught at Drexel for a little bit, and then I have come to Rutgers, and I'm still there.
There were no engineers in my family. I liked to play with dolls when I was little. I didn't have a whole bunch of toys, and I didn't play with Legos. I came from that type of family that didn't want me to have Lincoln Logs or Legos or any of that kind of stuff. And I had teachers that said, hey, you're really good at this. My old engineers did, so I said, okay, well, fine, I'll try it. That's why I got into engineering. I didn't know what an engineer did. I didn't have anybody in my family telling me what they did, and I was just really blessed and fortunate to have people around me that encouraged me to go into a field that I knew nothing about. So, how did I find myself in automotive engineering, doing automotive stuff? I'm from Michigan. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, okay? So, that's how I found myself doing automotive stuff. And ironically, I was never interested in the outside of cars, right? Because that's often what people think about. Well, the truth of the matter is the people that design a lot of the outer stuff in cars are artists. Really. You go into a design studio, you have a bunch of artists that come up with these fantastic drawings of what they think the future car should look like, and then they get with a bunch of people like me who don't give a hill of beans about what the car looks like, who only cares about the inside of the car, and then we tell them, and there's a battle about what you can do and what you can't do and actually be able to manufacture. So I ended up being an automotive just by the situation of they helped pay for my college education, and because I was from Detroit, Michigan, and I realized that I had a profound love for understanding mechanical engineering design, and I, along the way, had some summer internships with engine companies, Cummins engines, diesel, and I liked how engines worked, and I liked understanding how things were designed and how they were built. Why did I end up going back to school? Because that's non-traditional. Most people that have PhDs, most, and I'll have to check with some of the folks on the panel, but most go straight through. It's the quickest route, linear route, straight, point A, point B, you stay in school. So a lot of people, including my husband, wanted to understand why in God's name it seemed that I was a forever student, and why after making really good money would I go back and get a PhD. And it had to do with my experience working at a national lab. I was around people that did have PhDs, and it seemed like they were running a show. And it seemed like they were super duper duper smart and they were good at something. And I never felt I was good at something like the best. And I wanted to be the best at something. So I said, okay, why and get a PhD? I wish in the movie, in the movie it seemed like these people were so determined and I wish I had some bolt of lightning that somehow made, told me I was, going to do all these great things. But actually that's not the case. I was just really, really blessed, and I was tenacious and profoundly interested in things that bored other people to death. I was that kid that would sit and do math workbooks just cause. Then I would beg my mother to do the one that was the grade above and the grade below, just in case my teacher missed something, and she would take me, and couldn't afford much, but she could get those little math books, so I was that kind of kid. Why did I decide to be a professor? Because there's a couple of reasons, but I think my first reason was because of the negative experiences I had in the School of Engineering. There's not that many of us, in particular the area of engineering that I'm in, mechanical and aerospace. Women represent less than 10% of the population, and of that population in terms of women of color, I guess, women of color PhDs in mechanical engineering and aerospace are less than 1%.
The good thing is there's a lot more women and black women that are getting involved in engineering. It's not always easy when you're in classes, because sometimes you'll be the only person or the only black person there. Typically I'm the only black person. Oftentimes I'll be the only woman or one of only one or two women. So oftentimes you'll have to be very comfortable with being by yourself or not having a group that you can hang out with per se. But I think it's important to focus on doing and having a career that you're passionate about. And if you stay in a lane just because there's 100 other people that are doing the exact same thing and you feel like you'll feel comfortable because they're black and you're black, you might not reach the type of career or do the kinds of things that really excite you.
So my experience in school, both undergrad and in grad school, was a very different one. And I wanted to possibly give all students better. And so that's what motivated me, at least initially, to go into the academy, even though when I went to get the PhD, I thought that I'd maybe go off to a national lab, and somehow I got into the academia, and that's where I am now. I really, really like what Dr. Warren said about being prepared and who chooses to go into sciences or mathematics or STEM, to be prepared, to work hard, and to strive to be better than. I agree with that because today is a new day. And when I say a new day, when we look back, 50 or so years ago, people were really struggling, right? There was the model that when you go in, especially as an African-American person, right? You have to be twice as prepared, 3 times as prepared. And I think now some of our generations, like my little kids, mine, I have a 7, about to be 8-year-old, and I have a 10-year-old, right? And that kind of philosophy kind of blows over them, right? It's a new day. You still have to be. Nowadays, when you go to school as Americans, you're not just competing against other Americans. You're competing against people from other countries. So you have to be prepared. Not because you want to like intimidate them, but you want to be prepared so that you have some sort of job security. You need national security. Right? You want to be as fluid as they are, where they can go to another country and it not be their first language, but yet they're able to come and do very well. And we have to be able to do that too. We have to be prepared. If we have to pick up and work someplace else, that we can. And so that means we have to be competitive. Count on my hands of the number of black faculty in the School of Engineering. And within the School of Engineering, there are 5 or 6 different departments. In my department, I'm the only one. Yeah. I'm the only black woman in the School of Engineering for that matter. No, there's one other in electrical.
I work in Fortran here at West Crossing. I'm a social service coordinator, and we have a Girl Scout who's doing STEM. And she comes in a couple times a month, and she's doing science projects with the kids. Do you have any suggestions that she might be able to do with the children?
You mean actual activities? Oh, I can talk sideline. I have a bunch of activities. But in general, if she's going to do an engineering, because STEM, the engineers, we often get left out. Just be real, right? Science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and the engineers, we get left out. How do we get left out? We have people that'll teach scientific method and call it engineering design, and they're not the same. So, in general, I can give you some actual lessons sideline, but in general, in engineering, give people, if she's doing engineering lessons, she has to give the girls opportunities to fail. In engineering, the design process has within it failure. So whenever you design something for students, or most of the students that don't make it through the engineering curriculum are not used to or capable of withstanding failure. Not failure in grades, but to study something and not get it right then and there. Or with our design projects, it's a circle process where there's iterations. And so if she's doing engineering design, it has to be an iterative process that includes failure. You can't tell the kids how to fail, but they're going to build an egg drop and they're
It's not working, so look at it.
you got to look at it, you have to redesign. Right,
Try it again.
right. Absolutely.
Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Chennault.
Hello,
Stranger
Dr.
to me.
She's actually like one of my closest friends.
Hi, I just wanted to know why you did not mention that you are the first African American in the history of Rutgers University to receive tenure in the air.
I didn't think about it. Yeah, it's a weird thing, right? It's a weird.
Hidden figure.
Yes, it really is. It's a very weird.
A lot of times I feel in the black community, the cost of education is just ballpark. How much for a year here, you're looking at goes through
So I'm going to be honest. So ballpark, realistically, most schools cost anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 per year. Okay. Right. So when I said I'm going to be honest, that's the honest thing. Rutgers is a state school. So when you go to a state school, like I did when I was from Michigan, University of Michigan, glad as it's kept, is a state school. Go blue, absolutely, go blue, right? It's a state school. I went to my really good state school because I got in-state tuition, which is not, so state schools receive federal funding, so your tax dollars, so that we can have less tuition for in-state residents as opposed to Princeton. Princeton also gets money, but it's a private school. So state schools receive your tax dollars so that we can provide education for in-state students at minimal cost. So that's where I went for my undergrad. For my master's, I went to a private school, but fellowships and scholarships. I didn't have to pay for anything. Yeah.
Hi, sorry.
Dr. McKinley, so.
Yeah, so Dr. McKinley, I have a PhD in psychometrics. And I would say one thing that I figured out very early on, not being the first in my family to go to college or any of those things, but in our community, African American community, very few people really rely on academic scholarships. We push our kids for athletic scholarships, for basketball, for baseball, for football, soccer, all these things. But when your kid gets injured, they can't stay at the school if they can't play. So they can't get a degree and they can't go on for a master's or a PhD. So I would say that one thing that we as a community really need to instill in our children is the importance of doing well in school academically, not relying on a skill, not relying on a physical strength, because that is fleeting. As long as you keep your brain on top of your work and making sure that you're staying on the honor roll every time, that is something that can never be taken away from you, because I did not have to pay for my master's and PhD because of academic scholarships. I'm not good at any sport. I'm horrible at all sports, but I'm really good at math and I'm really good at statistics, and so that's what carried my life. Get off the field, get off the baseball, get off the soccer. They can keep you on the team with the 2.0, but you can't get into the scholarship with the 2.0. So if you can't play sport and do your work, let the sport go and do your work so you can go to college and get the degree.
Get to the library. That's what you do.
You're right, absolutely. I didn't pay for my PhD either.
What inspired you to get into engineering?
At first I didn't know what engineers did, but I liked the subjects that engineers studied. And so I had teachers that said, hey, you're good at science, you're good at math, and why not consider, at first they said consider looking into a field in science, and then after I got a little bit older, they started encouraging me to pursue engineering since I gravitated towards both of the subjects equally.
I just had a question that's being that it's such an intensive job that you do with my daughter going for the same thing. How do you stay focused? Like I said, sometimes they go through failure and just sometimes to stay focused and continue on with it.
I'm sorry, I tell my disclaimer to my students is I'm not condoning any religion, and I can't make you do any religion. But I tell my students, I pray before they go in. I pray for them when they go through defenses, because defense is when you defend your master's thesis.
right? And I go in, and they always make my students work harder because I'm a black girl, right? So my master's thesis defense student had like a 4-hour defense. You were there.
4 hours?
Yeah, when it should be like an hour. Wow. Hour, tops. Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of being focused, prioritize, and early on recognize the things that are important. So, for example, when I was in graduate school, I was adamant about giving back, and I had an advisor who was not black, who was a woman though, and she said, stop this. And I said, why? It's important, I need this. She said, get yours first. She said, after you get your degree, you can go out, you can do all these things, and if you don't get your degree, you can't help anybody else. So I tell my students that as well, get yours, plan on not having the same social life that your friends are going to have. I never did. My husband and I went to the same undergrad. I didn't see him, but like we used to see each other on holidays. No, I'm not. It's the truth, right? He was on Central, I was on North Campus, and I only saw him once a year. So how do you stay focused? You stay focused with a plan. Similar to when I said, go look up what your requirements are. Look them up now. Have your plan. Plan on not being the last one at the party. Plan on only going to one party per month. Plan on, if you're going to rush or whatever for all those, I'm telling you, this may sound like a bad thing, but if you're going to be a sorority or whatever, figure that out. Figure out how you're going to figure it out. You're going to be, I wasn't on a sorority, I'm not an advocate or discouraging, but figure it out. Your life will be different, but also understand that you also have to plan for fun too. So you might not be the star athlete, but
you can't be in a sorority now.
right, I'm not saying you can't, but I said plan on it, right? Right, my tutor that I went to when I was in undergrad, she did Delta, and she didn't plan on it. She had to take off for a semester because she didn't plan on it. Another guy, he planned on it. He did well and got his highest GPA when he was pledging, but he planned on it. He took advantage of the study hours, right? So, plan the fun. It sounds crazy, plan the fun. I used to schedule in my, Ricky Lake was the big, that was my treat for myself. That tells you how old I am, right? I'm really old. I used to plan in Ricky Lake because that was like my thing for myself, my reward. So I'd work all day and then I get to do my Ricky Lake, and then when I would exercise, I'd plan in that was my treat for myself. Yeah.
Earlier you spoke about planning as far as like if you want to pledge a sorority, plan that. Like,
plan.
That's
so,
extreme. That was extreme planning, but I'm a believer in planning and execution. Right. So give us a little bit of word on that for the folks.
And so I think that oftentimes plan, have faith. And when I talk about plan to fail too. So have a A, B, and C plan. So typically, even today, I plan out, well, what if this is successful and what if it's not? What's my plan B? What's my plan C? What if I only get half of what I really want? So I need to have a plan B and a half. So what I encourage a lot of young people to do is to go into whatever career they choose, understanding that it's not going to be easy and expecting to put in a lot of work. Don't expect to graduate and all of a sudden be driving a Lamborghini unless you're already wealthy. And to assume that in order to achieve what it is that you want, that it's going to take a lot of hard work. You might not get to be out at the parties or the clubs as much as some of your peers that may be doing that. But then, ultimately, sometimes you might end up employing them. You might end up giving them a job or an opportunity, because while they were at the club and you were studying, you have an opportunity that they may not have access to. So plan to work hard, continuously, plan to have fun too, because the brain is a muscle and it can't be operated at all times. Take care of yourself physically and mentally, because what you take in to your body can also have positive or negative effects on your brain. That's it.
That was fine. That was perfect, sis. Along the lines of the fun and stuff, so to inspire the young people, you know, we often gravitate to the things that we think is fun or cool or will reward us right away, right? So what is in engineering, or what can you describe in engineering that people could create or could keep the interest in that level for the younger sisters and brothers?
So for me, some of the things that I love working on have to do with designing cool things. Being able to design a power supply. I mean, how many people have taken apart an engine? I mean, that's cool to me. Being able to design things that fly. We are consumers in this country, but how many of us can actually take something apart, or how many of us can actually build something from scratch, right? So that's the exciting part. I think sometimes we have to reshape what we think is fun too. So a lot of times what's fun is what's easy, right? I mean, I used to be able to do the splits and do the whole, so that was fun for me, right? Because I could dance, and right, but you gotta reshape a little bit. So maybe instead of thinking of only what we could buy, thinking about how we could make it. And it's not only mechanical, which is what I do, which sometimes designing biomedical devices, that's still mechanical, right? Being able, when I was working on my PhD thesis, I was learning about things like how to make people hear better by designing cochlear implants, how to charge things remotely. So embracing the technology, but reshaping it so that you're not just buying it, but you're coming up with, I mean, Black people as a culture are trailblazers.
Yes.
Shouldn't we be the one that not only saying this would be cool, but now I can design it, right? So in terms of design, I think that being able to make your own stuff. Also, they're not listening to what engineers really are. So when I started talking, I was saying, well, I played with dolls. Well, my generation of going into interviews was about, well, did you take your computer apart? And I was like, no, we didn't have a computer. It's for me to take it apart. No, I didn't take the computer apart. But what I did do is I sculpted this, I built a dollhouse. Do you see what I'm saying? So what am I trying to, we need to reshape too what we think engineers do. Perhaps I like taking apart an engine, but somebody else may not like doing that, but they may like wearing clothes. So that may mean designing something to make different types of fabric, right? So reshaping what it is that we like to use. If you like drinking Coca-Cola, design a new Coca-Cola bottle. There's plenty of opportunities there, but we need to kind of refocus on how we look at what's around us and the technologies and figure out opportunities there. If people like dancing, design the shoes. One of my studies at Stanford was looking at, because I like wearing heels, looking at the difference between platform shoes and high heel shoes. And trust me, a lot of people thought that I was crazy, right? But there are engineers working for Nike doing pressure mapping of shoes, right? So why do you think I'm wearing like these clunky shoes? Because my weight is better distributed than if I was in a stiletto. Even though that was my compromise, so I could walk around. But this is what engineers do, and we don't hear about that. We don't hear about sound engineers, do we? No. But how many of those people walking up, everybody's talking about they wanted, so you think you could dance, you think you could sing. A sound engineer has to master the music, right? That's right.
So what do? They're behind the scenes on a computer trying to figure out how to equalize some non-singing person. And then figuring out, one guy was doing a study to figure out how you could have electronic devices so that you could change not just treble and bass, but how you could literally change the music to embed in different elements of what you typically like. So it may be, so almost kind of like when people come out with a remake, but creating a software where you can have a remake every time you listen to a song. What? I heard somebody say, what? I know. That's the kind of stuff that we do, right? That's the kind of stuff that we do. People don't hear about it, but we'll use it. We'll download an app, right? So I think we need to look at it as, we got to figure, instead of just taking it all in, we need to make some of our own stuff. Think about chemical engineers. Now, I'm not going to say anything, but think about all the technology that we have up in here. I was talking to Tabitha today about figuring out with my gray hair, right? Think about chemical engineers and chemists that are trying to figure out how we can dye some hair. That's chemistry, right? So it's there. We just need to kind of step back and look at what we're buying. Did I answer your question?
More than enough. Thank you very much.
I told you. We can be pro-life.
One more time.
Hello, hi everybody. You're talking to the most tech-challenged person in the room, but I need a definition for the term engineer.
Oh, that's a good question. So, first, there's a bunch of different types of engineers, right? So, my typical one I can't give because I have a bunch of other doctors in the room and they would raise their hand and they would tell me no. So my typical one is engineers like to solve problems, right? But then other doctors are like we don't do that too, right? So I would say one of the biggest differences between us and traditional science, people that are traditionally in science, is that we do provide that bridge between science and math. But more specifically, most science is focused purely on the exploration. Purely. Now, we reap the benefits from that exploration and that questioning about the world around us. Why is it that 10 people came in and the only people that got hired are Bart Smith or Slasher Rick, right? But what engineers do that's a little bit different, we look at what the problems and challenges are that are ongoing, and then we try to use our science and our math skills to actively fix that problem. Right. So, and sometimes a lot of what we do is driven by consumers. So, for example, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes we'll create an industry. But like people talk about Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs wasn't an engineer. He was a consumer, in my opinion. He was a consumer that had brilliant ideas, and then he kind of threw it over and told the engineers, you make it, this is what I want. So what do engineers do? Typically, we're on the hunt for interesting or challenging problems, and then we use what we know in terms of math and what we know in terms of science to solve it. So an example would be, well, people wanted to go from point A to point B, and so we realized we couldn't do it with squares, right? So people use wheels, and then we realized, well, gosh, it's getting pretty tiring to have 2 people carrying a cart, right? So we're going to strap on animals. Well, gosh, it would be a lot easier if we could propel something. And so, and it's evolutionary. We build upon other people's work, as people do in science as well. But typically, we're taking both. We take what the scientists discover, and we're like, oh, that's cool. I could use what you learned in order to fix this. And then we say, hey, that math person over there, they're able to show me how to model and predict what I'm seeing over here in the science, ooh, I could use that because now I don't have to fail 15 or 20 times, I only need to fail 5 times.
Right.
So that's why a lot of us, we use the computer because we're taking all of the math stuff, we're plugging it into the computer, so then we could minimize our failures, even though the failures are there.
Right.
So I kind of answered you, but what do engineers do? There are many different types of engineering, and I think if I listed some of them, it might be beneficial because it's very confusing. A lot of people say, well, a trained engineer, right?
Right.
That kind of, what is that?
Right.
So within the School of Engineering, we have electrical engineering, we have mechanical and aerospace engineering. So electrical engineering, those are people that, for example, design your electronics, right? Mechanical and aerospace, some typical examples of what we do are we design trains, we design infrastructure. We work with architects to figure out what the integrity or structural integrity of a building would be. We also work with civil engineers. Civil engineering is also in the School of Engineering. Civil engineers, they predominantly work with architects, buildings, they do bridges. So who's working on the bridges? Generally, those are your civil engineers working with scientists to do a whole lot of other studies that I won't get into. But bridges, overpasses, right? Industrial engineers. Industrial engineers typically will work in plants. So when you, after somebody like me who's primarily in design engineering, right, may design a project, then that's not, it doesn't end there. If you actually want to produce it in a plant format, right, you work with an industrial engineer in a plant, and the industrial engineer lays out what the plant routing will look like and what the process is for making something. And then they do studies to figure out where there's waste, where something that looked really good in the research center isn't working out on the floor. There's chemical engineers. So chemical engineers do a broad range of things. They often will work with material scientists, but chemical engineers work on anything from, like I said, hair dyes. They work on makeup. They work in petroleum. There's even an area of petroleum engineering, but they study the chemistry of a lot of our fossil fuels. Material science engineers, we're using them a lot nowadays. So material science engineers, they're not the same as those that study in chemistry that are seeking purely to understand the elements and the rocks and the chemistry that's already existing. Material scientists say, hey, these chemists have figured out all these elements. Now we're going to try to figure out something that's just totally new, right? So what do material scientists and chemists, chemical engineers work on? They look at different types of materials or designing different types of materials that go in your battery. So I just went on a battery panel a while back, and they were literally proposing different ways of making materials that go in your battery so that your battery will last longer, or to get rid of some of the nasty stuff, because there's some pretty toxic things in some batteries. Some of them, the materials in some batteries are banned in every other country. Okay? Or like your batteries that are hopefully with an explosion. So I did material science, who am I leaving out? Software engineering. Material science, computer science. So computer science, it depends on the university. Computer science could be in the liberal arts department, or it could be within the engineering department. And typically what they focus on are strategies for programming. Now programming differently than what we think of when we buy a lot of the toys and the kits. They're actually building the platform and the language that then lay people then go out and use in order to build websites and that kind of stuff. So when in the movie Hidden Figures, the one woman, when she was talking about Fortran,
Fortran.
Yeah, I was laughing because that was the first computer language I learned as undergrad and how it evolved, right? So that was one of the, so when I was a summer intern, one of the first languages I used was writing things in Fortran. How do you use Fortran? When you catch a plane. A lot of the programming, when you go online and you, I want to put this and to make sure that you can catch your flight on time, that was programmed by a computer programmer to make sure that there's an algorithm that's running that says, wait a minute, that seat is filled, so now there's a matrix here on the side that says, okay, it's taken, so now there's only these that are left, and it's running through a loop. So that's computer science. I think I got all of them.
All right, and any words of inspiration to those young aspiring engineers on the come up now? Or those who might not know that they're engineers?
Discover the engineer in you, because I think that a lot of people that are really talented often don't think about being an engineer because they don't really know what we do. And some of the coolest people are oftentimes those geeky people in the back that are either building things or experimenting with things and taking things apart, putting them back together, making things better. So if you're that person that buys something and then you soup it up, for example, or if you're that person that thinks that you wouldn't be a good engineer because you have to like cars, I would suggest that you take a look around at all the products that you use and ask yourself if you would want to be part of designing and changing them so that they're better for you.
And I like that way you said that, better for you, because in our community, like you were speaking earlier, we're mostly consumers, so it's good to see that we have some part to play in the actual manufacturing, design, and inventing of many of these products that we use. So, all right, well, we thank you for being on the East Coast. I know Michigan missing you. 6 mile, 7 mile, 8 mile, what's up? You know what I'm saying? Detroit, what? You know what I'm saying? Shout out to my brother Isaiah out there, with him and the fam, you know. Well, we thank you very much, sister. Much honors. We thank your husband as well, you know what I mean, for stalling you for us so we can get the interview with you. And we thank y'all for being just a happy couple and being loving and caring about your community as well as the academic world and the intellectual world that we in. Keep on praying, sister, because that's what's going to keep everything in balance.
That is for sure.
Definitely.
That's yes. Now that's the ultimate plan. God has the ultimate plan.
Definitely. My friend, I got a elder Rasta. He say, "Man, plan and Jah white Paul."
Yep. Yep. That is for sure.
That's how it
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Much honors, yo.
Thank you. Thank you so much.